They pinned her to the concrete floor. Four men, hands everywhere, tearing at fabric, at dignity, at hope itself. One of them laughed, a sound like breaking glass in the darkness of Building 7. The girl beneath them was 19 years old, Petty Officer 3rd Class Imogen Porter. Dark hair matted with blood, uniform torn at the collar, eyes wide with terror that had moved past screaming into something worse. The silence of someone whose voice had been stolen. From the shadows, Lieutenant Sienna Vance watched. 22 years old, athletic build coiled like a spring, long dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. She had 12 confirmed kills from Desert Storm. She had survived combat missions that turned grown men into ghosts. She had walked through fire and come out breathing. But nothing had prepared her for this. Nothing had prepared her for the moment when she realized that the enemy wasn't always across an ocean. Sometimes the enemy wore the same uniform. Sometimes the enemy slept in the bunk beside you. One of the men, the one they called Vaughn, grabbed Imogen's hair and yanked her head back. "Show us what you're good for." Sienna didn't think. Thinking was for people who had choices. She stepped out of the shadows like vengeance taking human form. Let her go. 4 heads turned. 4 sets of eyes that had been drunk on power suddenly faced something they hadn't expected. A witness. A threat. A woman who looked at them without fear, only calculation. Eric Vaughn released Imogen's hair. He was big, former wrestler, thick neck and thicker skull. The kind of man who'd spent his whole life being told he was special because he could hurt people. "Well, well," he smiled, all teeth and malice. "Look who came to play." The others spread out instinctively, predators circling. They'd done this before. The choreography of violence was familiar to them, comfortable. Sienna's eyes tracked every movement. Exit points, weapons of opportunity, the metal shelving unit to her left, the concrete floor beneath her boots, the distance between each man. Her mind was already 3 moves ahead, already calculating trajectories and consequences. I said, let her go. Vaughn took a step forward. Behind him, Imogen scrambled backward, pressing herself against the wall, making herself as small as possible, trying to disappear. "Or what? You'll report us?" Sienna felt the weight of her combat training settle over her like armor. 12 missions. 12 times she'd faced death and walked away. This was just another battlefield. Different terrain, same stakes. "I won't need to report you. I'll just put you down." Vaughn laughed. The others joined in. 4 men who'd never faced a woman who knew how to kill. 4 men who were about to learn a lesson written in blood and broken bones. The first one came fast, stupid, all muscle and momentum. Sienna sidestepped, used his weight against him, drove his face into the metal shelving with a sound like a car crash. He dropped and didn't move. 3 left. The second one was smarter. Waited, watched, looking for an opening. Sienna gave him one. A deliberate gap in her defense. He lunged. She caught his arm, felt the joint give way under her grip, heard the snap that meant he wouldn't be throwing punches for a long time. Knee to the temple. He folded like a puppet with cut strings. 2 left. Vaughn and his last friend rushed together. Coordinated. Dangerous. They'd trained for this, planned for this, prepared for the moment when their fun got interrupted. Vaughn went high, the other went low. Sienna ducked under the haymaker, but the kick caught her ribs. Pain exploded through her side. She felt something crack. The world tilted. Vaughn's weight drove her to the ground. Concrete bit into her back. His hands found her throat, squeezed. The room started to go dark at the edges. "I told you." His breath was hot on her face. "I told you you'd regret it." Black spots danced in Sienna's vision. Her lungs screamed for air that wouldn't come. She could feel consciousness slipping away like water through her fingers. But her hands were free. Sienna drove her thumbs into Vaughn's eyes. He screamed, released her throat, scrambled backward, clutching his face. She rolled, gasping, tasting copper and concrete dust. The fourth man grabbed her from behind, pinned her arms. His grip was iron. Former linebacker, maybe. Big enough to think size mattered more than skill. Hold her. Hold the bitch. Vaughn recovered, blood streaming from his ruined eye socket. His face was twisted with rage and pain and something darker. The face of a man who'd decided that mercy was for the weak. He drew a knife. I'm going to enjoy this. The fourth man's grip tightened. Sienna struggled, couldn't break free. Her ribs screamed with every breath. Her vision was still spotted from oxygen deprivation. Vaughn moved closer. The knife caught the dim light. 8 inches of carbon steel that had probably seen blood before. That would definitely see it again. Any last words? Sienna spat blood in his face. Yeah, behind you. Vaughn laughed. Thought she was bluffing. Thought desperation was making her stupid. The crack of a pistol cut through the room like Judgment Day arriving early. Vaughn's knee exploded. Bone and cartilage and tendon turned to pulp in an instant. He dropped, screaming, the knife clattering away across concrete. The man holding Sienna released her like she'd caught fire. Master Chief Petty Officer Theodore Brennan stepped out of the shadows. 62 years old, gray hair cut military short, eyes that had seen 4 decades of warfare and hadn't blinked. The pistol in his hand was steady as stone. Let her go. Now. The fourth man raised his hands. Master Chief, this isn't what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like. Brennan's voice was gravel and ice. 4 men, 2 women, a knife. I've seen this before. He looked at Sienna, still on the ground, ribs screaming, vision clearing. Are you hurt? I'll live. Sienna pushed herself up. Every movement was agony. Help the other girl. Brennan nodded, kept the weapon trained on the 4 men. Sienna moved to Imogen, who was still pressed against the wall, eyes glazed with shock. It's okay. Sienna wrapped her arms around the younger woman. It's over. You're safe now. Imogen's body was rigid, trembling, the kind of shaking that came from trauma so deep it rewired the nervous system. But she was breathing. She was alive. Sometimes that was enough. Behind them, Brennan secured the 4 men with zip ties, called for military police, the efficient movements of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Vaughn looked up through his pain and blood. You think anything will happen to us? You think this is the first time? Sienna turned, looked at him. This man who'd tried to kill her. This predator who thought power meant freedom from consequences. The brass nose. Vaughn's laugh was bitter, triumphant even through his agony. They've always known. They protect their own. Brennan held up a small digital recorder. Maybe they did before tonight, but this recording is going straight to the Inspector General and then to every news organization in America. The triumph died in Vaughn's eyes, replaced by something Sienna recognized from combat, the look of a soldier who just realized the battle was lost. You can't. Watch me. 3 weeks earlier, Joint Base Ironwood had been just coordinates on a map, a sprawling complex of sand and concrete in the Arizona desert where the Navy trained its most elite warriors, where candidates became SEALs, and legends were forged in pain and determination. Sienna Vance had reported for duty on a Monday morning in early June 1998. Temperature already climbing toward 90 degrees. Her olive green shirt already damp with sweat. Camouflage pants crisp with starch. Dark hair pulled back so tight it made her scalp ache. She'd walked across the parade ground feeling eyes on her like insects crawling across skin. 300 men watching, evaluating, judging, some with curiosity, some with hostility, some with something that made her combat instincts scream warnings she couldn't articulate. Master Chief Brennan's office smelled like old coffee and decades of testosterone, like every military office she'd ever entered. But there was something else here, something heavier, the weight of tradition, of resistance to change, of men who'd spent their entire lives in a world where women existed only on the periphery. He'd studied her file for a long moment. Marine Scout Sniper, 20 confirmed kills in Desert Storm, 2 Bronze Stars, Combat Action Ribbon, youngest female to complete Scout Sniper School, expert marksman, top of her class in land navigation and survival training. Impressive resume. Thank you, Master Chief. Wasn't a compliment. He'd looked up. His eyes were gray, weathered, carrying the weight of 4 decades in uniform. Paper's easy, reality is different. Sienna had met his eyes without flinching. She'd learned early that the first sign of weakness would be the last. That men like this were testing constantly, probing for soft spots, looking for excuses to prove their preconceptions right. I understand. Do you? Brennan leaned forward. His desk was immaculate, everything in its place. A career's worth of discipline distilled into perfect order. This base has 300 special warfare operators. All men, all trained killers. Most of them think you're a publicity stunt, a diversity checkbox, a joke that the brass is playing to appease politicians. What do you think, Master Chief? Something had flickered in his eyes then. Memory, maybe, or recognition, or perhaps the ghost of someone he'd known long ago in a different war. I think you remind me of someone I knew. Someone who taught me never to underestimate anyone based on what they look like or where they come from. He'd stood, walked to the window, looked out at the parade ground where candidates were running in formation, their cadence echoing across the desert morning. Report to Instructor Davis at 0500 tomorrow. PT assessment. You pass, you move to the next phase. You fail, you go home. I won't fail. We'll see. He'd open the door. One more thing, Lieutenant. Watch your back. Not everyone here wants you to succeed. Some of them will actively try to make sure you don't. They'll call it maintaining standards. They'll call it preserving the integrity of the program. But what they really mean is keeping women out. His voice had dropped. And some of them won't stop at just making training difficult. The warning hung in the air between them. Sienna had nodded, filed it away with all the other warnings she'd received throughout her military career. All the times someone had told her to be careful, to watch herself, to understand that the rules were different for her than they were for men. She'd survived Desert Storm, survived sniper school, survived every challenge the Marine Corps had thrown at her. She could survive this too. That's what she'd told herself anyway. The next morning came fast and brutal. 0500 on the parade ground, temperature already climbing, 42 male candidates in formation, all of them bigger than her, most of them glaring. Instructor Knox Davis walked the line like a shark circling prey, 6'4", 240 pounds of muscle and malice, shaved head that gleamed with sweat even in the early morning cool, arms covered in tattoos that told the story of 2 decades in special operations. He'd stopped in front of Sienna. Well, 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 look what we have here. The Navy's little experiment. Lieutenant Vance. Reporting as ordered, Instructor. I didn't ask your name, sweetheart. I know who you are. Everyone knows who you are. He'd leaned close, close enough that she could smell his breath. Stale coffee and something darker. Contempt, maybe. Or the particular kind of anger that came from seeing something you hated and couldn't control. You know what I think you are? No, Instructor. A mistake. A PR move. A pretty face they can put on recruiting posters to make the Navy look progressive and inclusive. He'd smiled. But don't worry, I'm going to fix that mistake, starting today. The PT assessment was designed to break her, not challenge her, break her. While other candidates ran 5 miles, Sienna ran 8. While they did 50 push-ups, she did 100. While they carried 60-pound rucks, she carried 80. Davis added weight to her pack when he thought she wasn't looking, changed the route to include steeper hills, made her repeat obstacles she'd clearly completed, marked her form as inadequate on exercises where she'd performed perfectly. The other candidates noticed. Some looked away, uncomfortable with the obvious unfairness. Others smiled, enjoying the spectacle, glad that someone was putting this woman in her place. Sienna said nothing, did everything. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed. Her shoulders felt like they were being pulled from their sockets by the extra weight in her ruck. But she kept moving, kept pushing, refused to give Davis the satisfaction of seeing her quit. 4 hours later, she was still standing. Barely. Her shirt was soaked through with sweat. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. Blood seeped through the bandages on her hands where the ropes had torn skin during the obstacle course. But she was standing. Davis had walked up, face twisted with something that might have been respect or might have been hatred. With men like him, it was hard to tell the difference. "You think you proved something today?" "I think I passed, instructor." "You passed the easy part." He'd leaned close, dropped his voice so only she could hear. "The hard part's just beginning, and I'm going to make sure you understand exactly what that means." He'd walked away, left her standing there in the Arizona sun with the taste of blood in her mouth and the certain knowledge that she just made an enemy who had the power to destroy her. That night, Sienna lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling. Every muscle screamed. Her hands were raw. Her ribs ached from the ruck march. But she was smiling because she'd seen it in Davis's eyes. The flicker of doubt, the crack in his certainty. He'd expected her to quit, expected her to break, expected her to prove him right. She'd proved him wrong. A voice came from the darkness. "You made an enemy today." Sienna turned. A man about her age stood in the doorway. Dark hair, kind eyes, the build of someone who'd spent years in special operations. But there was something different about him, something that suggested he saw the world differently than most SEALs. "Petty Officer, Second Class, Wyatt Sterling." "Everyone calls me Sterling." Sienna took the water bottle he offered. "Lieutenant Sienna Vance." "I know. Everyone knows." Sterling glanced toward the window, toward the offices where Davis was probably writing up his assessment of the day's training. "Davis is going to make your life hell. He already is. This is nothing. Trust me." Sterling's voice dropped. "There are things that happen here, things they don't put in the training manual, things that get covered up." "What kind of things?" Sterling hesitated, looked around, made sure nobody was listening. The barracks were quiet, most candidates already asleep, exhausted from the day's brutality. People disappear from this program, not because they quit, not because they fail out, because they're forced out, or worse. Worse? There's a building on the east side of base, Building 7. It's supposed to be storage, just another concrete box full of equipment and supplies. But at night, he'd stopped himself. "Look, I've said too much. Just be careful, okay? And don't go anywhere alone, especially at night. Especially if someone tells you there's extra training or a special evolution or anything that doesn't sound right." He'd left before Sienna could ask more questions, before she could probe deeper into what he meant, what he knew, what he'd seen. But the warning stayed with her, settled into her bones alongside all the other warnings, all the other hints that something was wrong at Joint Base Ironwood, something deeper and darker than simple resistance to female integration. The first week passed in a blur of exhaustion and pain. Physical training from 0500 to 1200, 7 straight hours of running, swimming, obstacle courses, and calisthenics. Combat diving from 1300 to 1700, learning to navigate underwater with limited visibility and heavy equipment. Nightland navigation from 2100 to 0300. Finding waypoints in the desert darkness using only a compass and the stars. 2 hours of sleep if she was lucky, sometimes less. Davis pushed her harder than any other candidate, made her repeat every evolution twice, singled her out for punishment details, assigned her extra watches, found reasons to dock her scores even when she performed flawlessly. And through it all, Sienna performed. Not just survived, performed. She placed third in the ocean swim, beat 40 men who had size and strength advantages, second in the obstacle course, first in rifle qualification. She could outshoot every candidate on the base, could navigate better than instructors with twice her experience. The other candidates started to notice, some with grudging respect, men who valued competence over gender, who recognized skill when they saw it, others with something uglier, resentment, anger, the fury of men who'd been told their entire lives that they were special, that they were elite, now facing a woman who was better than them at the very things that define their identity. On day 8, she'd found her bunk destroyed, mattress slashed open, stuffing spilling out like entrails, belongings scattered across the floor, photos torn, letters shredded, a note pinned to her pillow with a knife. "Go home, bitch." Sienna had picked up the note, read it calmly, studied the handwriting, the choice of weapon, the psychology of someone who would do this. Then she'd walk to the duty office. "I need to report vandalism." The petty officer on watch barely looked up from his magazine. "Fill out a form, we'll investigate when we get to it." My belongings were destroyed. My personal effects were, "Lieutenant." He'd finally met her eyes, and in those eyes, she'd seen it. Not just indifference, satisfaction. "Do you know how many complaints we get around here? You think yours is special because you're—" He gestured vaguely at her. "You? I think my complaint is valid regardless of my gender." "Sure, fill out the form." He'd gone back to his magazine. Conversation over, message delivered. Sienna had filled out the form, knew nothing would happen, had learned long ago that official channels often protected the institution rather than the individual. She'd cleaned up her bunk, slept on the bare mattress, reported for training the next morning as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't received a clear message that she wasn't wanted, that her presence was offensive, that some people would go to considerable lengths to make her leave. But she remembered every face that smiled when they saw her destroyed belongings. Started keeping a mental list, names and faces, evidence of a pattern, preparation for a battle she could feel coming but couldn't yet define. Day 12 brought the night-land navigation exercise. Standard evolution. Candidates dropped in pairs at different coordinates in the desert, given waypoints to find. Task: navigate back to base through unfamiliar terrain using only compass and stars. Nothing unusual, except that Sienna's partner was Eric Vaughn. She'd known his name before they were paired. Everyone did. Former wrestler, Division I athlete who'd washed out of college and found his way to the Navy. The kind of man who'd always used his size to get what he wanted, who'd never had to develop skills beyond intimidation. "Looks like it's just you and me, sweetheart. Let's just complete the exercise. What's the hurry? Long night ahead." He'd stepped closer, invaded her personal space in a way that was clearly intentional. "You know, some of the guys have been talking, saying you need to learn your place." Sienna's training had kicked in automatically. Assess threat, identify escape routes, calculate response options. She'd done it 1,000 times in combat, against enemy soldiers who actually wanted to kill her. This was different. This was someone wearing the same uniform, someone who was supposed to be on her side. "My place is completing this exercise and moving to the next phase." "See, that's the problem." Vaughn moved closer still. "You don't get it. You don't belong here. This isn't about your skill or your scores or any of that bullshit. It's about the fact that SEALs are men, have always been men, will always be men. And the sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone. Back off." "Or what? You'll report me?" He'd laughed. "Who do you think they'll believe? A decorated SEAL candidate with a spotless record? Or some diversity hire who couldn't hack it and started making accusations when things got tough?" He'd reached for her, fast, practiced, the move of someone who'd done this before. Sienna moved faster, years of combat training compressed into a single instant. She trapped his arm, twisted, applied pressure to the joint in exactly the way her Marine Corps instructors had taught her, dropped him to his knees in one fluid motion. I said, "Back off." Vaughn's face had contorted with pain and rage, the fury of a man who'd never been denied, who'd never faced consequences, who'd never been beaten by a woman. "You're going to regret that. You're going to regret—" "Hey." A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Sterling emerged from the tree line. Two other candidates behind him, men who'd apparently been following at a distance, making sure Sienna wasn't alone. "Everything okay here?" Sienna released Vaughn's arm, let him scramble to his feet, watched him clutch his shoulder where she'd applied pressure to the joint. "Navigation error. We got separated." Sterling had looked at Vaughn, still on the ground clutching his shoulder, then at Sienna. He hadn't needed to ask what really happened. The evidence was written all over Vaughn's face. The humiliation, the rage. "We should buddy up, safer that way." They'd completed the exercise together. Vaughn stayed at the back of the group, silent, nursing his arm and his pride. But his eyes never left Sienna, and in those eyes, she'd seen something she recognized from combat. Not just anger, not just humiliation, the promise of violence, the promise of revenge, the look of a man who decided that mercy was weakness, and that the only appropriate response to defeat was escalation. She'd made an enemy, a dangerous one. And unlike Davis, who had to maintain at least the appearance of professionalism, Vaughn operated in the shadows, where official rules didn't apply, where witnesses were few and consequences were rare. 3 days later, Sienna found a note in her locker. The handwriting was different from the first one, neater, more controlled. The message was specific rather than general. "Building 7, 2300. Come alone if you want to know what's really happening here." She'd stared at the note for a long time, turned it over in her hands, analyzed it from every angle. A trap, obviously. Probably Vaughn, almost certainly worse than just Vaughn. An invitation to go somewhere isolated at night, to make herself vulnerable, to give her enemies the opportunity they'd been waiting for. Every tactical principle she'd ever learned screamed at her to ignore it, to report it, to stay safe, to understand that walking into an obvious trap was the definition of stupidity. But Sterling's words echoed in her mind. People disappear. Things get covered up. Building 7. If something was happening on this base, something the chain of command was ignoring or actively enabling, she needed to know, needed evidence, needed to see for herself what was lurking in the shadows. Because if women were disappearing, if assaults were being covered up, if Building 7 was more than just storage, then someone needed to document it. Someone needed to be a witness. Someone needed to care enough to risk themselves for the truth. At 22:45, Sienna slipped out of the barracks. She'd changed into dark clothing, taken her combat knife, planned her route to avoid security cameras and guard posts, moved through the base like she'd moved through hostile territory in Iraq. Silent, invisible, a ghost in the darkness. Building 7 was exactly where Sterling had described. A squat, concrete structure on the far edge of the base, surrounded by empty storage units and broken vehicles. The kind of place that looked abandoned during the day, that nobody paid attention to, that existed in the gaps between official notice. No lights visible, no guards posted, nothing to suggest anything unusual. Sienna circled the building twice, checking for surveillance, identifying entry points and exit routes, looking for signs of occupation or activity. Nothing seemed out of place. Just another abandoned storage facility slowly decaying in the desert heat. But as she approached the main door, she heard something that made her blood freeze. A scream, female, cut off suddenly as if someone had clamped a hand over the source. Sienna didn't hesitate, didn't stop to think or plan or consider consequences. She moved to the side entrance, tested the handle, unlocked, slipped inside. The interior was dark, industrial, Shelving units created a maze of corridors and dead ends. The smell hit her first. Alcohol, sweat, something chemical that burned her nostrils. And beneath it all, unmistakable and terrible, the copper tang of blood. She followed the sounds deeper into the building, her eyes adjusting to the darkness, her combat instincts screaming warnings, every sense heightened, every nerve alive. Voices now, male, laughing. The particular kind of laughter that came from people who knew they were doing something wrong and didn't care, who felt protected by darkness and complicity and institutional indifference. Hold her still, she's fighting too much. Then hit her again. More laughter. The sound of a slap, a muffled cry. Sienna rounded a corner and saw them. 4 men, faces she recognized from training. Faces from her list of people who'd smiled when her bunk was destroyed. Faces of men who'd made it clear through 1,000 small actions that they didn't want her here. And between them, on the floor, Imogen Porter. 19 years old, new to the base, eager and idealistic in the way that only people who hadn't yet been broken could be. The men hadn't seen Sienna yet, were too focused on their victim, too drunk on power and opportunity, too certain that they were untouchable. 4 against 1. No weapon except her knife. No backup, no support. Every tactical principle said retreat, get help, come back with reinforcements and authority and the weight of official sanction. But Imogen screamed again, and in that scream, Sienna heard every woman who'd ever been told to stay quiet, stay small, stay safe, don't make waves, don't cause trouble, accept that this is just how things are. She'd heard that voice her entire life, had listened to it more times than she could count, had made herself smaller and quieter and safer in 1,000 different ways. Not tonight. Tonight she stepped out of the shadows and into the light. Let her go. The military police arrived 15 minutes after Brennan made the call. 2 MPs, young, professional, faces carefully blank when they saw the scene. 4 men on the ground, one with a destroyed knee screaming, 2 unconscious, one nursing a broken arm and muttering incoherently. 1 woman covered in blood that wasn't entirely hers. Another in shock, curled in the fetal position, making sounds that weren't quite human. They took statements. They photographed everything. They bagged the knife as evidence. They collected the recording device from Brennan. They did everything by the book because Brennan was there, watching, making sure every procedure was followed to the letter. But Sienna saw it in their eyes, the calculation, the doubt. The question they didn't ask but were definitely thinking. What did you do to provoke them? It was always the same question. In every assault case, in every situation where a woman fought back, the assumption that she must have done something, must have invited attention, must have somehow deserved what happened. Lieutenant Vance, the senior MP, a staff sergeant with 20 years of hard living etched into his face. You'll need to come with us, for your own protection. Protection from what? The sergeant didn't answer, didn't need to. They both knew that protection was just another word for control, for making sure she didn't talk to the wrong people, didn't tell the wrong story, didn't complicate the narrative that the Navy wanted to tell. Sienna sat in the back of the MP vehicle, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like diesel and old sweat. Through the window, she watched them load the 4 men into ambulances, watched them help Imogen into another vehicle, headed for the base hospital. Brennan appeared at the window, leaned close, spoke quietly. Don't say anything without a lawyer present. I didn't do anything wrong. Doesn't matter. His eyes were sad, knowing, carrying the weight of 4 decades of watching the system protect itself at the expense of individuals. You survived. You fought back. You embarrassed powerful people. In their eyes, that's worse than any crime. The vehicle pulled away. Through the rear window, Sienna watched Building 7 disappear into the desert darkness. A squat, concrete structure that looked like nothing special. Just another storage facility on just another military base. but she would never forget it. Would never forget the sound of Imogen's screams, the weight of 4 men, the taste of blood and concrete dust. The moment when she'd had to choose between her own safety and someone else's survival. She was confined to quarters until further notice. The sergeant who delivered her told her to think carefully about her future, that false accusations against decorated service members could have serious consequences, that she should consider whether she'd really seen what she thought she'd seen. Sienna sat on the edge of her bunk and looked at her hands. They were steady now. The shaking had stopped. The adrenaline had faded. What remained was clarity. She'd killed men in combat, taken lives from 1,000 yards away. Clean, professional, necessary. She'd never questioned those kills, never lost sleep over pulling the trigger on enemy combatants who would have killed her given the chance. Tonight she'd fought with her hands, driven her thumbs into a man's eyes, broken bones and shattered joints, bitten through flesh and cartilage. It should have felt different, should have felt wrong somehow, should have violated some code she'd internalized about appropriate levels of violence. It didn't. It felt like justice, raw and imperfect and necessary. The kind of justice that came when official channels failed, when the system was designed to protect perpetrators rather than punish them, when the only choice was between fighting and surrendering. She'd fought, and she'd do it again, as many times as necessary, until either the system changed or it destroyed her trying. The door burst open at 0500. Sienna was already awake, sitting on the edge of her bunk, waiting. She'd learned in combat that the worst moments always came at dawn, that attacks happened when people were groggy and disoriented, when defenses were down. Commander Stephen Vickers stormed in like a man on a mission. Behind him, 2 military police stood at attention. Vickers was 50, silver hair cut regulations short, face carved from granite and decades of ambition. The kind of officer who measured success in promotions and power, who'd climb the ladder by knowing when to push and when to protect the institution. Lieutenant Vance. His voice was ice-wrapped in military courtesy. "You're under arrest." Sienna stood slowly. Every movement sent fire through her ribs where Vaughn had kicked her. On what charges? Assault and battery against 4 fellow candidates, violation of curfew, unauthorized entry into a restricted facility, conduct unbecoming an officer. The words hit like physical blows. Not the charges themselves, but the fact that they existed at all. That someone had sat down and carefully crafted accusations designed to turn victim into villain, to transform self-defense into aggression, to rewrite the night's events as something completely different from what had actually happened. Those men were raping Petty Officer Porter. That's your version. Vickers smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. They tell a different story. They say you lured them to Building 7, that you attacked them without provocation, that Officer Porter was never in danger until you arrived and created a situation that spiraled out of control. That's a lie. Is it? Where's your proof? Where are your witnesses? Master Chief Brennan has a recording. He saw everything. Vickers's smile widened. Master Chief Brennan has been relieved of duty pending investigation into unauthorized discharge of a firearm and conducting surveillance without proper authorization. His recording is being reviewed for authenticity by expert witnesses who will testify that digital recordings can be easily manipulated. The room tilted. Sienna felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. They were doing it, actually doing it, turning victims into villains, rewriting reality to protect predators, using the full weight of institutional power to bury the truth. What about Petty Officer Porter? She'll testify to what happened. Will she? Vickers leaned close. Officer Porter gave a statement this morning. She says the encounter was consensual, that you misunderstood the situation, that you attacked 4 men who were doing nothing wrong, that she's confused about why you would do such a thing, but she's certain that she was never in danger from anyone except you. The air left Sienna's lungs. Imogen had recanted. The girl she'd saved, the victims she'd fought for, had just called it consensual. They got to her. No one got to anyone, Lieutenant. Officer Porter simply told the truth. And now you're going to face the consequences of your actions. The MPs moved forward. One produced handcuffs, standard issue. The metal was cold against Sienna's wrists. Click, click. The sound of freedom ending, the sound of the trap closing. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of justice. You have the right to an attorney. The words washed over her, familiar from 1,000 television shows, surreal when applied to her own situation. She was being arrested, actually arrested, for saving someone's life, for doing the right thing, for embarrassing people who had the power to destroy her. The cell was 8 feet by 6 feet, concrete walls painted institutional gray, metal bunk bolted to the floor, toilet in the corner that offered no privacy, a window too high to reach that showed nothing but a rectangle of desert sky. Sienna sat on the bunk and forced herself to think tactically, to assess the situation with the same clinical detachment she'd used in combat. Enemy forces, Commander Vickers, the 4 attackers and their families, whoever had convinced Imogen to recant, the institutional weight of a military that valued reputation over truth. Allied forces, Brennan, maybe, Sterling, possibly. Everyone else was an unknown or an enemy. Objective, survival, justice, preventing this from happening to anyone else. Resources, limited. Her own testimony, Brennan's recording, if it wasn't successfully discredited. The truth, for whatever that was worth, against organized lies. Plan, unknown. She'd need help. Legal representation. Someone who knew how to fight this kind of battle. The door opened. A woman entered. Mid-40s, civilian clothes, briefcase that screamed lawyer. She sat across from Sienna without asking permission, without introducing herself, just opened her briefcase and started pulling out documents. Lieutenant Vance, I'm Catherine Wright. JAG assigned me to your case. I didn't request a lawyer. You need one. Wright's voice was matter-of-fact, professional, the tone of someone who delivered bad news so many times she'd stopped feeling it. I've reviewed the charges. They're substantial. If convicted, you're looking at a dishonorable discharge and up to 10 years in military prison. For defending myself and saving another woman from being raped. That's your narrative. Wright pulled out more documents. Here's theirs. 4 decorated SEAL candidates brutally attacked by a female officer who couldn't handle the pressure of the program. Officer Porter, consensually involved with one of the men, caught in the middle when you misread the situation and responded with excessive force. Sienna stood, paced. The cell was too small for rage this size, too confining for the fury building in her chest. That's not what happened. I believe you. Wright's voice softened slightly, but belief doesn't win cases. Evidence does. And right now, their evidence is stronger than yours. What about my injuries? The bruising on my throat, the broken rib, the defensive wounds on my hands. Self-defense is a hard sell when you're accused of being the initial aggressor. They'll say you got hurt in the struggle after you attacked them. They have medical evidence too. Vaughn's destroyed knee, the other candidates' injuries, all documented, all photographed, all consistent with an unprovoked assault by someone with advanced combat training. Sienna felt the walls closing in, felt the weight of the system pressing down. This was what they did, how they operated. Turn victims into perpetrators. Make self-defense look like aggression. Use the very skills that made someone capable of surviving as evidence that they were dangerous. Wright was quiet for a moment, then she spoke again. Off the record? I've been a JAG for 20 years. I've seen a lot of cases like this. Women who fought back and got punished for it. Systems that protect predators because it's easier than fixing the problem. She paused. You're not going to get justice through the official process. The fix is in. Too many powerful people want this to go away quietly. If you want to win this war, you're going to have to change the battlefield. How? Wright stood, headed for the door. I can't tell you that, but I can tell you this. Sometimes the only way to beat a system is to go outside it, to find allies in unexpected places, to make enough noise that silence becomes impossible. The door closed. Sienna was alone again with concrete and desert sky and the slowly forming edges of a strategy she didn't yet fully understand. But one thing was clear. She couldn't fight this alone. Couldn't win by playing by rules that were designed to ensure her defeat. Needed to find a way to change the game itself. 3 days passed in that cell. 72 hours of nothing but her thoughts and the sound of footsteps in the corridor and the slow movement of sunlight across the wall. Time to think, to plan, to prepare for battles she could feel coming but couldn't yet define. Then the door opened and Theodore Brennan walked in. He looked older, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. A man who'd spent 40 years serving a system he believed in, only to watch it betray everything he thought it stood for. You look terrible, Chief. You should see the other guy. Brennan sat heavily on the bunk. They suspended me, full investigation, charged me with unauthorized discharge of a firearm, conducting surveillance without proper authorization, and conspiracy to defame fellow service members, for saving my life, for making them look bad. Brennan leaned forward. Sienna, listen carefully. We don't have much time, and I need you to understand exactly what we're up against. They're going to try to bury this. Bury you, bury me, bury the whole damn thing. Make it go away like it never happened. I know, but I've been doing some homework, called in favors from 40 years of service, talked to people who remember when the Navy actually cared about doing the right thing instead of protecting its image. He pulled a folded paper from inside his jacket, worn, creased from being opened and closed repeatedly. Building 7 isn't new. It's been happening for 3 years, maybe longer. I found records, incident reports that were filed through proper channels and then mysteriously disappeared. Women who complained and then vanished from the program. Medical discharges, transfers to remote locations. One woman who simply stopped showing up, and nobody seemed to care enough to ask why. How many? 53 documented cases, probably more that were never reported. Women who were too scared or too ashamed or too certain that nobody would believe them. The number hit like a fist to the gut. 53 women, 53 victims, 53 stories buried because the truth was inconvenient. Because careers mattered more than justice. Because the institution valued its reputation over the lives of the people it was supposed to protect. Where are they now? Scattered, transferred to different bases, forced out of the service entirely. Some got medical discharges for anxiety and depression. Some just disappeared from the system. Brennan's voice cracked. But there's one you need to know about. Private First Class Delaney Kemp. Who is she? She reported an assault in February. 4 men in Building 7. Same story as yours. Same pattern. Same method. She filed a complaint through proper channels, named names, provided details. What happened to her? She disappeared. Filed the complaint on February 14th. Got transferred to Fort Bragg on February 20th. Except she never reported for duty there. Her family filed a missing person report 3 months ago. The investigation was buried. Someone with serious pull made sure nobody looked too hard. Brennan paused. Sienna, I think she's still alive. I think they put her somewhere she can't talk, somewhere her voice can't be heard. Where? I'm working on it. But if they did that to her, they'll do it to you. The only reason you're not already gone is because I made that recording. Because I'm a master chief with 40 years and connections. Because making me disappear is harder than making a lieutenant disappear. So what do? We get out ahead of this. We go public before they can bury us. We find allies who care more about truth than reputation. We make enough noise that silence becomes impossible. How? I'm in a cell. You're suspended. We have no credibility, no platform, no way to make anyone listen. Brennan smiled. It was the smile of a man who'd spent 4 decades learning how to fight dirty when fighting clean didn't work. We have something better than credibility. We have the truth. And we have people who are tired of watching it get buried. He pulled out a phone, handed it to her through the bars. One call, make it count. Sienna looked at the phone. One call to change the battlefield. One chance to turn defense into offense. One opportunity to stop being the victim and become the threat. She knew exactly who to call. The phone rang 3 times. Then a woman's voice, sharp and suspicious, and used to fielding calls from people who wanted things. Senator Elspeth Hartley's office. How may I direct your call? My name is Lieutenant Sienna Vance. I need to speak to the senator about a matter of urgent national importance. The senator is very busy. If you'd like to leave a message, I can ensure she receives it. Tell her I have evidence of systematic sexual assault and institutional cover-up at a United States military installation. Tell her I have 53 victims. Tell her I have proof that goes all the way to the top of the chain of command. Silence on the line, then measured and careful. Hold, please. 2 minutes passed. Felt like 2 hours. Sienna could hear muffled voices in the background. Conversation she couldn't quite make out. Then a different voice came on the line, older, more authoritative. A voice used to being obeyed and used to speaking truth to power. This is Senator Elspeth Hartley. Who am I speaking with? Sienna took a breath, felt the weight of the moment, the choice she was making, the line she was crossing. There would be no going back after this, no retreat to safety, no option except forward. Ma'am, my name is Lieutenant Sienna Vance. I'm currently confined to the brig at Joint Base Ironwood, Arizona, facing charges for defending myself and another woman from sexual assault. The men who attacked us are free. The victim was coerced into recanting her testimony, and I have evidence that this is part of a pattern of assault and cover-up that's been happening for years. That's a serious allegation, Lieutenant. I have documentation. I have witness testimony. I have a recording of the assault. And I have a Master Chief with 40 years of service who's willing to testify about everything he's seen and everything the Navy has tried to bury. Why are you calling me? Because the chain of command is compromised, Senator. Because the people who should be investigating this are the ones covering it up. Because I need someone who has the power to force accountability. Someone who cares more about truth than protecting the institution. Senator Hartley was quiet for a long moment. Sienna could hear her thinking, could almost feel the calculation happening, the weighing of political costs and benefits, the assessment of risk versus reward. Then, how many victims did you say? 53 documented cases, ma'am, probably more that were never reported. Names? I can get them. Evidence? Recordings, medical reports, incident reports that were filed and then buried, transfer records that don't make sense, email communications between commanders discussing how to handle problem females. Everything you'd need to prove systematic failure at every level of leadership. Another pause, longer this time. Then Senator Hartley spoke again, and her voice carried a weight that suggested she'd made a decision. I'm going to send someone to interview you, a member of my investigative staff. If your story checks out, if the evidence is real, I'll convene emergency hearings of the Armed Services Committee. Thank you, Senator. Don't thank me yet, Lieutenant. If you're lying to me, if this is some kind of publicity stunt or revenge scheme, I will destroy you myself. I will make sure you spend the next decade in prison and that your name becomes synonymous with false accusations. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, I understand completely. And I'm not lying. I'm just done being quiet. The line went dead. Sienna handed the phone back to Brennan through the bars. She's sending someone. Good, Brennan stood. Now we wait. No. Sienna's mind was already moving to the next step. Now we find Delaney Kemp. Because if they buried her, they'll try to bury us. And I want to know exactly what we're up against before the real battle begins. Finding Delaney Kemp took Theodore Brennan 36 hours and favors from 3 decades of military service. He called contacts in naval intelligence, Army CID, people scattered across the military establishment who owed him or respected him or remembered when the service was about something more than protecting its own reputation. The answer came back on a Tuesday morning. Brennan appeared at Sienna's cell with a face like storm clouds gathering over the desert. I found her. Where? Bethesda Naval Hospital, psychiatric ward. Admitted 8 months ago under direct orders from the Army Surgeon General's office. Psychiatric ward? For what? The official diagnosis is delusional disorder with persecutory features. Paranoid thinking, difficulty distinguishing reality from fantasy. According to her file, she became mentally unstable after her deployment, started making false accusations against fellow soldiers, became a danger to herself and others. Brennan's voice was flat, dead, the voice of a man who'd seen evil and couldn't quite process that it existed within an institution he dedicated his life to. They locked her up to keep her quiet, diagnosed her as crazy so anything she says can be dismissed. It's perfect. She tries to tell the truth, and they point to her psychiatric record as proof that she's delusional. Sienna felt something cold settle in her chest. Not rage anymore, something colder, more focused. The clarity that came right before pulling the trigger on a confirmed target. We need to get her out. Can't. Not while you're in here. Not while I'm suspended. Brennan leaned against the bars. But I made a call. Admiral Catherine Rhodes, first female 4-star admiral in Navy history, commands Naval Special Warfare. She's reviewing the case. Will she help? She's one of the good ones. But Sienna, you need to understand what we're up against. The 4 men who attacked you? I did more digging. One is the son of a 2-star general. Another is nephew to a sitting congressman. The third one's father is a former Secretary of Defense, which means they'll fight. They're already fighting. Brennan pulled out another document, but I found something else, something bigger. Remember I told you the cover-up went high? Yeah, it goes higher than I thought. He showed her a still frame from a video. Admiral Thomas Blackwell, Chief of Naval Operations, the highest-ranking officer in the entire United States Navy. Sienna's blood went cold. I have video of him coordinating with Vickers and a 2-star general, discussing how to suppress testimony, how to address witnesses, how to make this all go away before it becomes a political problem. Show me. Brennan played the video on his phone. The quality was grainy, clearly taken without the subjects knowing, but the audio was clear enough. The faces were unmistakable. Commander Vickers sitting in what looked like an expensive office. Leather chairs, mahogany desk, the kind of place where decisions got made that affected thousands of lives. Across from him, a 2-star general whose name Sienna recognized from news reports about military reform initiatives. And beside the general, Admiral Thomas Blackwell himself. Silver hair, stars on his collar, the weight of command in every line of his face. The Vance situation is contained. Vickers's voice was confident. Porter recanted. The evidence is being suppressed by our expert witnesses. By next week, this will be a non-story. The Admiral nodded. And the other women? The ones from previous incidents? Most are too scared to talk. The few who might be problems are being addressed individually. Vickers smiled. These women are vulnerable, sir. They've been vulnerable their entire careers. It's not hard to convince them that silence is safer than truth. The general spoke. What about the Kemp girl, the one who disappeared? Taken care of. Bethesda Naval Hospital. Psychiatric commitment under orders that originated from the Surgeon General's office. but were actually pushed through by our allies. She's been diagnosed with delusional disorder. Anything she says now can be dismissed as mental illness. And if someone investigates, we have a doctor who'll testify that her commitment was medically necessary. We have psychiatric evaluations that support the diagnosis. We have a paper trail that shows proper procedure was followed at every step. The general paused. We learned from Tailhook. The key is documentation. Make everything look legitimate. Make it so anyone who questions the process looks like they're attacking proper medical care. Admiral Blackwell spoke for the first time. His voice was ice, controlled fury wrapped in military discipline. Good work. The last thing we need is another scandal that sets recruitment back a decade. Women are already enough of a problem in the ranks without giving them ammunition to claim systematic discrimination. He leaned forward. If this Vance woman continues to be an issue, if she doesn't accept the deal we're prepared to offer her, there are other options, more permanent options. We need to send a message that making waves has consequences. The video ended. Sienna stared at the screen, mind trying to process what she just heard. The Chief of Naval Operations, the highest authority in the service, not just aware of the cover-up, but actively coordinating it. Not just protecting predators, but threatening to make problems disappear permanently. Where did you get this? Anonymous source. Brennan closed the phone, sent it to me with a note that said the Navy needed to see what leadership really looked like. No name, no contact information, just the video and the implied message that someone inside wanted the truth to come out. It could be fabricated, a deep fake. They'll say we doctored it, already had it analyzed by an independent forensic expert, someone I trust who owes me favors. It's real. Every pixel verified, every voice print matched. This is Admiral Thomas Blackwell, conspiring to obstruct justice and threaten witnesses. Sienna felt something shift inside her. Not rage anymore, not fear. Something colder and more focused. The clarity that came right before making a kill shot. The certainty that came from knowing exactly what needed to be done. We can't release this yet. What? Brennan stared at her. This is exactly what we need. Proof that goes to the top. Proof they can't explain away or discredit. And if we release it now, they'll claim it's fake. They'll say we're desperate. They'll have experts testify about deepfakes and digital manipulation. By the time the truth comes out, the damage will be done and nobody will believe us. So what do? We use it as leverage. We go directly to Admiral Blackwell. Give him a choice. Support real reform or watch his career burn. You want to blackmail the Chief of Naval Operations? I want to give him an opportunity to be on the right side of history. Sienna's voice hardened. These men have operated in darkness for decades. They've relied on silence and fear and institutional indifference to protect themselves. But now we have proof. Proof they didn't know existed. Proof that could destroy everything they built. And if he calls our bluff, if he decides to destroy us before we can destroy him, then we release the video to everyone, every news outlet, every social media platform, every member of Congress. We burn it all down and let the chips fall where they may. Sienna met Brennan's eyes. But I don't think he'll call our bluff. Because at the end of the day, these men care more about their careers than they care about protecting predators. Give them a way out that lets them save face and they'll take it. Guarantee it. The next 72 hours were controlled chaos. Senator Hartley's investigative team descended on Joint Base Ironwood like an invading force. Lawyers, investigators, staff members with top-secret security clearances and congressional subpoena power. Commander Vickers tried to stonewall, claimed that congressional jurisdiction didn't extend to internal military matters, that the investigation was interfering with good order and discipline, that Senator Hartley was overstepping her authority. Hartley's response was to hold a press conference on the steps of the Capitol. Joint Base Ironwood, systematic sexual assault spanning multiple years, institutional cover-up reaching the highest levels of military leadership. 53 documented victims. The words hit the news cycle like a bomb. By evening, every major network was running the story. By morning, the Pentagon was in full crisis mode. By noon, under pressure from both Congress and media scrutiny, Sienna was released from the brig pending the congressional hearings. She walked out into Arizona sunshine feeling like she'd been underground for years instead of days. Her eyes hurt from the brightness. Her muscles were stiff from confinement, but she was free. Brennan was waiting outside with Sterling and 3 other SEALs she recognized from training. Men who'd decided that truth mattered more than tribal loyalty, that honor meant something more than protecting the Brotherhood at all costs. "Welcome back to the land of the living," Chief said. "How bad is it?" Sterling answered. His face was grim. "Base is on total lockdown. No one in or out without authorization. Vickers is running 24/7 damage control. The 4 attackers have been moved off base, lawyered up, protected by their families' connections. And Imogen Porter, still in the hospital, under guard. They're saying it's for her protection, but everyone knows it's to keep people from talking to her, to keep her isolated until she's convinced that the story she told is the only story she's allowed to tell. I need to see her." "Can't. Base commander's orders. No contact between you and any potential witnesses. They're building an airtight case, and they don't want you contaminating their version of events." Sienna looked at the 5 men standing with her. Warriors who'd chosen conscience over convenience, who'd risked their own careers to stand with someone they barely knew. "Why are you helping me?" Sterling spoke first. "Because we've seen what happens here. We've heard the stories that don't make it into official reports. We've watched good people get destroyed while predators climb the ladder. And we're tired of being complicit through silence." Another SEAL stepped forward. Petty Officer First Class Dante Morrison, dark-skinned, quiet, the kind of operator who measured his words carefully because he knew they carried weight. "Because I have a sister," Morrison's voice was steady, "and I'd want someone to fight for her the way you're fighting for these women. I'd want someone to care enough to risk everything for truth." The other 3 nodded, a silent vote of confidence, a declaration that some battles transcended personal interest, that some fights were worth losing everything to win. "Thank you." Sienna felt something crack in her chest, not breaking, opening. She'd spent weeks thinking she was alone, fighting a war with no allies, no backup, no support except one old Master Chief who'd already sacrificed too much. She'd been wrong. Brennan cleared his throat. "Sentimental moments over. We have work to do. The hearings start in 10 days. Between now and then, we need to find every victim, document every case, build a narrative so comprehensive and convincing that denial becomes impossible. How do we find 53 women who've been scattered across the military and civilian world?" Morrison spoke. "I have contacts in personnel, people who owe me favors. I can run searches for transfers out of Ironwood over the past 3 years. Cross-reference with medical discharges, disciplinary actions, and early separations from service. I can reach out through SEAL networks," Sterling added. "There are people who served here during the relevant time periods. Some of them know things they've never said out loud. Maybe seeing someone actually fight will give them the courage to speak. And I have someone working on getting access to Delaney Kemp," Brennan said. "Admiral Rhodes is pushing for an independent medical review of her psychiatric commitment. If we can prove they institutionalized her to keep her quiet, it changes everything." Sienna looked at her small arm. 5 men and 1 woman against an institution that had existed for centuries, against power structures that reached the highest levels of military command, against predators who thought themselves untouchable, and systems designed to keep them that way. The odds were impossible. She'd faced worse. "All right, let's go to war." They worked 18-hour days in a conference room that Senator Hartley's staff had secured off base. Morrison pulled transfer records and found patterns that made Sienna's stomach turn. Women transferred within days of filing complaints. medical discharges for anxiety and depression that coincided almost perfectly with reported assaults. Reassignments to remote locations where isolation made follow-up investigation nearly impossible. The pattern was clear, deliberate. Someone had refined this process over years, had learned exactly how to make problems disappear while maintaining plausible deniability. Sterling talked to SEALs who'd been stationed at Ironwood during the relevant time periods. Most refused to talk. Some admitted they'd heard rumors, but claimed they'd never witnessed anything directly. A few, after enough pressure and appeals to conscience, named names and described incidents that matched the pattern Morrison had found in the records. Brennan coordinated with Senator Hartley's investigative team, passed information back and forth, verified facts, built connections between incidents that had seemed isolated but were actually part of a systematic pattern. And Sienna wrote, compiled everything into a comprehensive narrative that traced 3 years of assault and cover-up. 53 women, 53 individual stories that together painted a picture of institutional rot. She wrote late into the nights, fueled by coffee and rage and the growing certainty that this mattered in ways that transcended her own case. That what happened to her in Building 7 was just one battle in a much longer war. On day 7, Brennan got the call he'd been waiting for. Admiral Rhodes came through. She's ordering an independent medical review of Delaney Kemp's psychiatric commitment. 3 civilian doctors with no military ties. If they find that the diagnosis was fraudulent, Kemp will be released immediately. When? Tomorrow. Medical team is flying to Bethesda tonight. And Sienna? Rhodes wants to meet you after the review is complete. Says she has a proposal. What kind of proposal? The kind that changes careers. Brennan paused. Or ends them, depending on how you look at it. The meeting happened in a secure facility in Virginia. Clean white walls, conference table, security protocols that suggested serious people having serious conversations about serious things. Admiral Catherine Rhodes was everything Sienna had hoped for, and more. 62 years old, gray hair cut short in a style that was professional without trying to mimic male patterns. Eyes that had commanded fleets and broken glass ceilings and survived 4 decades in a system designed to exclude people who looked like her. Lieutenant Vance. Rhodes's handshake was firm, professional, the grip of someone who knew her own strength and didn't need to prove anything. I've read your compiled report, all 300 pages. If even half of it is true, we're looking at a systematic failure of leadership at every level of the chain of command. It's all true, Admiral. Every word, every incident, every cover-up. I believe you. Rhodes sat, leaned back, studied Sienna with the intensity of someone making command decisions that would affect thousands of lives. Which is why I'm personally taking charge of the investigation. I'm establishing a special victims investigation unit with independent authority to pursue cases across all branches of service. Full subpoena power, congressional oversight, reporting directly to the Secretary of Defense and the Armed Services Committee. That's exactly what's needed, and I want you to help build it. Sienna blinked, tried to process what she was hearing. Ma'am, your SEAL candidacy is over. The Navy made sure of that when they charged you. Rhodes's voice was matter-of-fact. You'll never wear the trident through official channels. That dream is dead, and we both need to accept it. She paused. But you have something more valuable than a trident. You have credibility with victims that no institutional investigator could ever achieve. You have combat experience that makes you respected by operators, and you have the kind of moral courage that can't be taught or trained. You walked into Building 7 knowing the odds, knowing you might not survive. And you did it anyway because it was right. What are you offering? A chance to fight a different war, a more important war. Rhodes leaned forward. Help me build this unit from the ground up. Help me create a system where women like you don't have to choose between justice and their careers, where victims are protected instead of punished, where predators face consequences instead of promotions. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an investigator. I'm barely qualified to lead a fire team, much less build an entire investigative apparatus. You're exactly qualified. Rhodes stood, walked to the window, looked out at the Virginia landscape. Because you've lived it. You understand what victims face because you are one. You know how the system fails because it failed you. And you have the kind of determination that doesn't accept failure as permanent. She turned back. The military needs people like you, Lieutenant, not people who know how to follow orders without question. People who know when orders are wrong and have the courage to say so. That's rarer than you might think, and it's exactly what we need to make real change. Sienna thought about the sealed trident she'd never earned, the dream she'd carried since childhood of becoming part of the most elite warrior brotherhood in the world. The goal that had driven her through sniper school, in combat deployments, in 12 confirmed kills, and every obstacle the Marine Corps had thrown at her. That dream was dead, had died the moment she'd stepped out of the shadows in Building 7, had been buried when Commander Vickers slapped handcuffs on her wrists. But maybe something better could rise from its ashes. I'll do it. Good. Rhodes extended her hand. Your first assignment starts after the hearings conclude. For now, focus on your testimony. Make it impossible for them to ignore. Make it impossible for them to dismiss. I will. And Lieutenant, Rhodes paused at the door. What you did in Building 7, fighting those men, saving that girl, it took more courage than anything I've seen in 40 years of service. More courage than most people will ever have to show. You should be proud of that. I just did what had to be done, Admiral. That's what courage is. Doing what has to be done when doing nothing would be easier, when staying safe would be smarter, when the system itself punishes you for choosing right over easy. Senator Hartley made the final arrangements for the meeting that would change everything. A secure location in Virginia, no staff allowed, no witnesses beyond those directly involved, just Sienna, Brennan, Senator Hartley herself, and Admiral Thomas Blackwell. The meeting was scheduled for 1400 on a Thursday. Sienna arrived early, studied the room with tactical precision honed by years of combat. Exit points in case things went wrong, sight lines to maintain visual control, the psychological weight of what was about to happen settling over her like armor. Brennan arrived next, carrying the laptop containing the video like it was a nuclear weapon. In a very real sense, it was exactly that. The power to destroy a career, to topple institutional authority, to force accountability from people who thought themselves above such mundane concerns. Senator Hartley came last, looked at both of them with an expression that combined admiration with deep concern. You understand what you're doing? Once we play this card, there's no taking it back, no negotiation, no second chances. I understand perfectly, Senator. We're forcing the system to choose between protecting itself and doing what's right, between maintaining the illusion of integrity and actually having it. And if it chooses to protect itself, if Blackwell decides that destroying you is easier than reforming the institution, then we show the world exactly what that protection looks like. Sienna's voice was steel. We release the video everywhere simultaneously. We make it impossible to contain. And we let the American people decide what kind of military they want defending them. Admiral Thomas Blackwell walked in at exactly 1400. Not a second early, not a second late. The precision of someone who'd spent 50 years in uniform, measuring his life in military time. He was 70 years old but carried himself like a much younger man. Ramrod straight, every movement economical and controlled. Eyes that had commanded carrier battle groups and made decisions that shaped global strategy. He looked at Sienna the way a hawk looks at a mouse, with the absolute certainty that the outcome was predetermined. So, you're the one causing all this trouble. I'm the one telling the truth, Admiral. Your truth. A version of events that's being contradicted by multiple witnesses, by forensic evidence reviews, by the sworn testimony of 4 decorated candidates who have no reason to lie. Evidence reviews that you ordered, witnesses that you helped coach, testimony that you coordinated. Sienna pulled out Brennan's laptop, opened it, turned it so Blackwell could see the screen. I have a video, Admiral. A video of you coordinating with Commander Vickers to suppress testimony, to address witnesses, to make this entire situation disappear before it becomes politically inconvenient. Blackwell's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A calculation, a reassessment of the threat level. That video is fabricated, a deep fake designed to discredit legitimate leadership. We both know it isn't. Senator Hartley spoke for the first time. Her voice carried the authority of 3 decades in Washington. I've had independent forensic experts analyze every frame. Voice prints verified against known recordings. Metadata authenticated. Pixel-level analysis confirming it's not digitally manipulated. It's real, Admiral, and it's damning. Blackwell turned to her. His face hardened. Senator, you don't know what you're dealing with. These accusations are threatening national security, the stability of naval operations, the ability of the service to maintain recruitment and retention in an increasingly hostile political environment, the stability of your career. Hartley cut in. Her voice was ice. Let's be honest, Admiral. You're not protecting the Navy. You're protecting yourself and a network of officers who value institutional loyalty over justice. That's absurd. Is it? Sienna stood, walked closer. 53 women, Admiral. 53 documented cases of assault and harassment at Ironwood alone, over just 3 years. All buried, all suppressed, all protected by people like you who decided that careers and reputations mattered more than the lives being destroyed. Those cases were investigated and found to be without merit, found to be inconvenient, found to be threatening to careers you wanted to protect. Sienna's voice was hard. I've talked to those women, Admiral. I've heard their stories. I've watched the pattern repeat over and over. Assault, report, retaliation, silence. And all of it enabled by leaders who looked the other way because actually addressing the problem would have been difficult. You don't understand how the military works. I understand exactly how it works. I've lived it. I've survived it. Sienna stepped even closer. And I'm going to change it. Not because I want to destroy the Navy, but because the Navy I love deserves better than what you've made it. Blackwell actually laughed. A sound without humor. You? A disgraced lieutenant with a ruined career and a reputation for instability? You think you can change a system that's existed for 200 years? I think I already am. Sienna pulled up her phone, showed him the screen, social media trends, news coverage, congressional statements demanding reform. While you've been trying to silence me, something interesting happened. 23 women came forward publicly. Hundreds more reached out privately. Congress is demanding investigations. The media won't let the story die. Advocacy groups are calling for your resignation. She showed him headlines, opinion pieces, editorials calling for accountability. Your window for control is closing, Admiral. Every day this continues, more people speak up, more evidence surfaces, more of your carefully constructed narrative falls apart. Right now, at this moment, you have 2 choices, which are support real reform, independent investigation with congressional oversight, prosecution of everyone involved in assaults and cover-ups, policy changes that actually protect victims instead of predators. Be remembered as the admiral who fixed the problem instead of perpetuating it. She paused. Or keep fighting. Keep trying to protect your friends and your reputation. And watch this video go public. Watch your career end in disgrace. Watch your name become synonymous with institutional corruption. Be remembered as the man who covered up rape to protect his legacy. Blackwell's face had gone pale. You can't threaten me. I'm not threatening you, Admiral. I'm offering you a way out. Sienna's voice softened. I don't want to destroy the Navy. I love this institution. I wanted to serve it my whole life. I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. She paused. Let the emotion show through. But I can't serve an institution that protects predators and punishes victims, that values silence over truth, that treats assault as a PR problem instead of a crime. And if I can't change it from the inside, I'll change it from the outside. And if I refuse, if I tell you to release your video and see what happens, then we release it everywhere simultaneously. Senator Hartley leaned forward. Every news network, every social media platform, every member of Congress, the Inspector General, the Department of Defense Inspector General. And we make sure everyone knows that you were offered a chance to do the right thing and you chose your career instead. She paused. Your choice, Admiral. History is watching. And history has a very long memory for people who choose wrong at moments like this. The silence stretched for an eternity. Sienna watched emotions war across Blackwell's face. Pride fighting with pragmatism. Institutional loyalty battling self-preservation. The death throes of a man realizing that power had limits, that control was an illusion, that even admirals could fall. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet, almost defeated. What exactly do you want? Full investigation of Ironwood and any other installation where credible allegations exist, led by independent counsel with full subpoena power. Congressional oversight at every level. No military interference. Prosecution of all individuals involved in assaults and subsequent cover-ups. No deals. No protected retirements. Full accountability. Sienna continued. Policy reform across all branches. Anonymous reporting systems that actually work. Independent victim advocates with real authority. Training that doesn't treat sexual assault as a checkbox evolution. Real consequences for retaliation, and your public support for all of it. That would mean admitting the Navy failed, admitting I failed. The Navy did fail, Admiral. The question is whether it can learn from that failure or whether it keeps repeating the same mistakes until Congress steps in and forces change from the outside. Sienna met his eyes. You've served for 50 years. You've commanded fleets. You've led men and women into combat. You've made decisions that shaped global security. Is this how you want to be remembered? As the man who protected rapists because admitting the problem would have been embarrassing. Something cracked behind Blackwell's carefully maintained mask. His shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, the weight of 50 years settling onto him all at once. I have a daughter. His voice was barely above a whisper. 25 years old, brilliant, capable. She wanted to be a naval aviator, wanted to fly fighters off carriers the way I did when I was young. Sienna waited. Let him speak. I talked her out of it, told her the military wasn't safe for women, that she'd face harassment and discrimination, and 1,000 obstacles that had nothing to do with her ability to fly. Blackwell's voice broke. I was protecting the system that made it unsafe, perpetuating the very culture I should have been fighting to change. The confession hung in the air, raw, honest, the first completely true thing he'd said since entering the room. Then help me make it safe, Sienna said gently. Not for me. My SEAL career is over. But for your daughter. For every woman who wants to serve without being afraid. For every person who believes the military can be better than what it's become. Blackwell closed his eyes, took a long breath. When he opened them again, something had shifted, some internal calculation completed. All right, tell me exactly what you need and I'll make it happen. The announcement came 1 week later. Admiral Thomas Blackwell stood at the Pentagon podium, facing 100 cameras and 1,000 questions. The weight of command visible in every line of his face. I'm here to announce the establishment of an independent investigation into allegations of sexual assault and systematic cover-up at Joint Base Ironwood and potentially other military installations. This investigation will have full subpoena power, congressional oversight, and will report directly to both the Secretary of Defense and the Senate Armed Services Committee. He paused. Let the weight settle. Let the cameras capture the moment. I also want to address Lieutenant Sienna Vance directly. The past weeks have seen her testimony questioned, her character attacked, her mental health scrutinized. I want to be clear, on the record, that after personally reviewing all available evidence, I believe her account of the events in Building 7 is credible and accurate. The Navy owes her an apology, and I'm here, today, to deliver it on behalf of the service. The briefing room erupted, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, the sound of an institution being forced to confront itself. Blackwell continued through the noise. Effective immediately, I'm implementing comprehensive policy reforms. We're establishing anonymous reporting systems with real protections for victims. We're creating independent victim advocate positions in every command with authority that supersedes local chain of command. We're mandating training that treats sexual assault as the crime it is, rather than a compliance checkbox. He paused again. And we're establishing a special victims investigation unit with independent authority to pursue cases across all branches of service. This unit will have full investigative power, its own legal staff, and will answer only to civilian oversight. Lieutenant Vance has agreed to help build and lead this unit. More chaos, more questions. Blackwell let it wash over him. Then he spoke one final time. To every service member who has suffered in silence, who believed no one would listen, who thought the system would never change, I want you to know that we hear you, we believe you, and we will not let you stand alone. Sienna watched from the gallery, Brennan beside her. Delaney felt exhaustion, relief, and underneath it all, hope. The kind of hope that came from watching the impossible become real. Blackwell continued answering questions, defending his decision, explaining how the reforms would work, taking responsibility in a way that leaders rarely did. When the press conference finally ended, Sienna turned and saw them. The women gathering in the gallery, Imogen Porter, released from isolation, tears streaming down her face. Delaney Kemp, free for the first time in 8 months, eyes clear and focused. And row after row of others. 23 who'd already come forward publicly, more joining every day. 53 women finding their voices, finding their power, finding the courage to say that what happened to them mattered. The war wasn't over, would never truly be over. But today they'd won a battle that mattered. And sometimes, in wars like this, that was enough to keep fighting. The trials began in late August. Military courtrooms at Joint Base Quantico, removed from Ironwood to ensure impartiality. The 4 attackers tried separately to prevent jury contamination, but the prosecution strategy was coordinated, overwhelming, devastating. Eric Vaughn went first, sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, hands shackled, face that still carried hatred every time his eyes met Sienna's across the courtroom. Judge Advocate General Captain Patricia Monroe took the bench, the first female JAG officer to preside over a case of this magnitude. Her appointment itself was a signal that things were changing. In the matter of the United States Navy versus Petty Officer First Class Eric Vaughn, we will hear opening statements. Lieutenant Commander James Morrison stood for the prosecution. Your Honor, the evidence will show that on the night of June 15, 1998, the defendant and 3 co-conspirators lured Petty Officer Third Class Imogen Porter to Building 7 with the intent to commit sexual assault. When Lieutenant Vance intervened to protect Officer Porter, she too was attacked with deadly force. Morrison turned to the gallery where Imogen sat, rigid, hands folded tightly, but there, present, refusing to be silenced anymore. The prosecution will present testimony from multiple victims who experienced similar assaults at the same location. We will present physical evidence collected from the scene. We will present expert testimony about the psychological effects of trauma and coercion on victim testimony, and we will present a digital recording that captures the defendant's own words during the commission of these crimes. Vaughn's civilian attorney stood, Harrison Webb, expensive suit, practiced sincerity, paid for by one of the powerful families backing their son. Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence. The alleged events were a consensual encounter between adults that was tragically misunderstood by Lieutenant Vance. We will demonstrate that Officer Porter's initial statements were made under duress, and that her subsequent recantation and return to truth was voluntary and accurate. Sienna felt her jaw tighten. The same lies, the same victim blaming, the same playbook they'd used for years. Even now, facing overwhelming evidence, they couldn't accept responsibility. But this time was different. This time there were witnesses willing to testify, evidence that couldn't be suppressed, a system finally forced to care about truth. The prosecution called Imogen Porter first. She walked to the witness stand like someone approaching their own execution. Every step visible effort, every breath a choice to keep moving forward. But when she sat down and the prosecutor asked her to state her name, her voice was steady. Petty Officer 3rd Class Imogen Porter. Ms. Porter, can you describe in your own words what happened on the night of June 15th? Imogen's eyes found Sienna's in the gallery, drew strength from the woman who'd saved her, from the survivor who'd become a warrior. I was told to report to Building 7 for additional training. When I arrived, there were 4 men waiting. They grabbed me, tore my uniform, held me down while I screamed and fought. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice never wavered. I thought I was going to die. I thought no one would help me. And then Lieutenant Vance appeared. She fought all 4 of them, saved my life. The courtroom was silent, every person present feeling the weight of her testimony. Ms. Porter, you previously issued a statement recanting this account. You said the encounter was consensual. Can you explain why you made that statement? Imogen looked directly at Vaughn, met his eyes without flinching for the first time since the assault. Because I was threatened. They told me they would destroy my father's business, that my brother would never get into the Naval Academy, that I would be diagnosed as mentally unstable and institutionalized like other women who'd reported assaults. She straightened in her chair. They made me more afraid of telling the truth than of lying. But I'm not afraid anymore. What happened to me was real. It was violent. It was rape. And I want the world to know. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination, tried every tactic, questioned her memory, her mental state, her motivations, suggested she'd been coached by Lieutenant Vance or Senator Hartley's investigators. Imogen didn't break, didn't waver, was a rock against which his questions shattered and fell away as meaningless. When she stepped down from the witness stand, Sienna saw what had been broken begin to heal, saw a victim becoming a survivor becoming a witness becoming someone who'd helped change history. Sienna was called next, walked to the stand with the same calm she'd carried into combat, told her story again. Every detail from the note in her locker to the sounds in Building 7 to the fight to Brennan's intervention. The defense tried to paint her as unstable, vengeful, someone with a grudge against male authority, someone whose combat trauma made her see threats where none existed. She looked at the jury, 12 officers from different branches, different backgrounds, different perspectives on what the military should be. I didn't choose this fight. I didn't want to be a symbol or a crusader or anything except a SEAL. But when I saw Imogen Porter being attacked, when I heard her screaming for help, I had a choice: intervene or walk away, fight or surrender. She paused. I've made a lot of choices in my military career, some good, some bad, some that still keep me awake at night. But choosing to fight for Imogen, choosing to risk my own life to save hers, that's the one choice I'll never regret. That's the choice that defines who I am more than any other. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witness after witness, victim after victim, the pattern becoming undeniable with each testimony. Building 7, the same location, the same predators, the same methods, the same institutional indifference to suffering. The defense tried everything: character assassination, procedural objections, expert witnesses questioning the reliability of trauma memory, suggestions that this was a coordinated conspiracy to destroy 4 innocent men. None of it worked. On the final day, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. Sienna sat in the gallery gripping Brennan's hand so hard her knuckles turned white. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "you've already won. You changed the conversation. You gave these women a voice. You proved that one person standing up can make a difference. It's not enough. They need to be punished. They need to face consequences. And they will be, one way or another." Brennan's voice was certain. "Even if this jury somehow fails, even if the system somehow protects them again, you've already ensured they'll never be anonymous, never be safe from the truth they tried to bury." The jury returned. Captain Monroe asked the foreman to rise. "On the charge of sexual assault, how does the jury find?" Sienna stopped breathing. The courtroom went silent, the weight of history pressing down on a single moment. Guilty. The word hit like thunder, like justice finally arriving after being delayed for far too long. On the charge of conspiracy to commit sexual assault. Guilty. On the charge of assault and battery against Lieutenant Vance. Guilty. On the charge of conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman. Guilty. On all counts. Guilty. 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 The courtroom erupted. Imogen Porter collapsed into sobs of relief. Delaney Kemp clutched her chest as if her heart might explode. The other survivors in the gallery held each other, crying, laughing, shaking with the release of tension carried for years. Eric Vaughn was led away in chains, face blank with shock, future destroyed. The certainty of his own untouchability shattered beyond repair. Sienna felt something release inside her. Tension she'd been carrying not just for months, but for her entire military career. Every time she'd been told to stay quiet, every time she'd made herself smaller, every time she'd accepted treatment that would never have been acceptable for men. Justice. Real justice. It actually existed when people cared enough to fight for it. The other 3 defendants were tried over the following months, all convicted on all counts, all sentenced to decades in military prison, their careers destroyed, their reputations ruined, their names forever associated with cowardice and violence. Commander Stephen Vickers was court-martialed for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and unlawful command influence. His defense argued he was following orders from above, that he was just a cog in a larger machine, that punishing him wouldn't address the systematic failures. The jury didn't care. 20 years in military prison. The 2-star general whose son had been among the attackers was forced into early retirement, lost his pension, his name stripped from buildings and awards, his legacy forever linked to the scandal he'd helped perpetuate. And Admiral Thomas Blackwell, true to his word, pushed through reforms that changed everything. Anonymous reporting systems with real protections, independent investigation units with authority that transcended local command, victim advocates in every command with the power to actually help rather than just document suffering. The Navy Sienna had dreamed of joining was finally, slowly, painfully becoming the Navy it should have been all along. 3 months after the last trial concluded, Sienna stood in Admiral Rhodes's office at the Pentagon, the same office where they'd first met, where Rhodes had offered her a choice between bitterness and purpose. "Commander Vance." Rhodes's voice carried both pride and weight. "Your new rank suits you." "Thank you, Admiral. Still getting used to the sound of it." "You'll grow into it." Rhodes gestured to a chair. "The Special Victims Investigation Unit is now fully operational. 20 investigators, full subpoena power, independent legal counsel, authority that spans all branches of service." She paused. "I want you to lead it, not assist." Not help build, lead. You'll report directly to me and to the Congressional Oversight Committee. You'll have complete autonomy to pursue cases wherever the evidence takes you. No interference from local command. No political considerations beyond following the truth. Ma'am, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified to command an organization of that magnitude. I'm a combat operator, not an administrator. You're exactly qualified. Rhodes's voice was firm. You've fought this war from the inside. You've survived what these victims are going through. You understand the psychology of predators and the failures of systems better than any investigator who's only read about them in textbooks. She stood, walked to the window overlooking the Pentagon's vast parking lots. More importantly, you understand that this fight isn't about one case, or one base, or one branch of service. It's about changing a culture that's existed for centuries. A culture that treated women as auxiliary rather than essential. That valued institutional reputation over individual justice. That chose silence over truth again and again until finally someone refused to stay silent. Rhodes turned back. That's what we need, Commander. Someone who won't back down, won't compromise, won't stop until the job is done right. Someone who cares more about being effective than being liked. I won't fail you, Admiral. I know you won't. Rhodes extended her hand. Welcome to the fight, Commander. The real fight. The one that never ends, but that we keep fighting anyway, because it matters. 10 years passed. A decade of battles won and lost. Of victims saved and voices silenced. Of slow, grinding progress against institutional resistance. Commander Sienna Vance stood before a congressional committee one final time. 32 years old now, gray starting to show at her temples. Lines around her eyes from sleepless nights and difficult decisions. The weight of command visible in the set of her shoulders. Behind her, a screen displayed the statistics she'd fought to achieve over a decade of work. 317 cases investigated, 243 prosecutions, 94% conviction rate, 73% victim retention rate, meaning nearly 3/4 of survivors who reported through the unit remained in service or returned after their cases were resolved. Numbers that represented lives, futures, justice delivered when the system had failed before. Senator Elspeth Hartley, now chair of the Armed Services Committee, leaned forward. Commander Vance, some critics say your unit has been too aggressive, that you've destroyed careers based on unproven accusations, that you've created a climate of fear where innocent people are presumed guilty. We've destroyed careers based on evidence, Senator. Sienna's voice was firm, clear, unapologetic. After thorough investigation, with full due process, with conviction rates that speak to the strength of our cases. She paused. And yes, we've created a climate of fear. For predators. For people who thought they could assault colleagues without consequences. For commanders who thought they could bury complaints to protect their careers. That's exactly what we intended to do. If you could go back to that night in Building 7, knowing everything you know now, would you still walk into that room? Sienna thought about Imogen Porter, now running sexual assault prevention programs for the Pacific Fleet, training new generations of sailors to recognize and report misconduct. She thought about Delaney Kemp, who'd become a victim advocate after her release from Bethesda, who'd spent a decade helping other survivors navigate the system that had failed her. She thought about the 317 survivors who'd found their voices because someone had finally listened, who'd gotten justice because someone had cared enough to fight for them. And she thought about Master Chief Theodore Brennan, who died 6 months earlier at age 83, who'd spent his last decade proving that you were never too old to choose conscience over convenience, who'd been buried with full military honors in a funeral attended by hundreds of women whose lives he'd helped change. Senator, I'd walk into that room 1,000 times, because some missions you don't complete by surviving. You complete them by making sure the next person doesn't have to face them alone. The hearing concluded. Sienna stepped down from the witness table and found Sterling waiting by the exit. He was a lieutenant commander now, running SEAL training with new protocols designed to identify and eliminate toxic behavior before it could take root. Hell of a speech, Commander. Learn from the best. Brennan would be proud. Yeah. Sienna felt the familiar ache of loss. He would be. They walked out of the Capitol together into spring sunshine, into a day that felt warmer and brighter than days had felt a decade ago. Outside, a group waited. 50 women who'd survived assaults and become advocates, who'd transformed their own pain into purpose, who dedicated their lives to ensuring that what happened to them wouldn't happen to others. And in their center, a monument, dedicated 3 months earlier in a ceremony that had drawn survivors from across the country. Black granite carved with 53 names. The women who'd suffered at Ironwood, the victims who'd become survivors, the survivors who'd become heroes. At the top, an inscription, Building 7, 1998, where silence broke and justice began. Sienna touched the cold stone, felt the names beneath her fingers, each one representing a life, a story, a battle fought in darkness until someone finally brought light. Sterling spoke quietly. You think it's over? No. Sienna smiled. It's never over. Evil doesn't give up. Systems don't change permanently without constant pressure. But we won this battle, and we gave the next generation better odds, better tools, better examples to follow. That's all we can do, right? Fight our war and hope the next one is easier. Sienna looked at the monument, at the women gathered around it, at the sky above them, clear and blue and full of possibility. Yeah, that's all we can do. Fight like hell. Never surrender. Never accept that wrong is permanent or that change is impossible. She touched the trident on her chest, Brennan's trident, given to her the day before he died, his hands shaking as he pinned it to her uniform, with fingers weakened by cancer, but spirit strong as ever. You earned this, not through BUD/S, not through the official program, but through something harder. You fought a war that no one wanted to acknowledge. You faced enemies that hid behind uniforms and regulations and institutional power. And you won. His eyes had been clear despite the cancer eating him from the inside. Warriors don't need a trident to change the world, but you deserve one anyway. Wear it. Remember what it means. Not just physical courage, moral courage, the harder kind, the kind that costs more and matters more. Now she wore it every day. A reminder that some battles weren't won with bullets. Some enemies couldn't be killed from 1,000 yards away. Some wars required a different kind of courage, the kind that walked into Building 7 knowing the odds were impossible, the kind that stood up when everyone said, sit down, the kind that spoke when everyone demanded silence, the kind that kept fighting even when fighting seemed futile. Commander Sienna Vance looked at the monument one last time, then turned and walked down the Capitol steps, surrounded by warriors who'd fought battles no one saw, who'd won victories that would never make headlines, who'd changed a system that had seemed unchangeable. Behind them, the monument stood, a promise carved in stone. This happened. These women mattered. This fight was worth it. And because of their courage, their sacrifice, their absolute refusal to surrender to institutional indifference, the military would never be the same. The weapon had changed. The mission hadn't. And the war, the real war against silence and complicity and institutional rot, continued. But now there were more warriors, more voices, more hope. Sienna touched her trident one final time, felt Brennan's presence like a hand on her shoulder, like a voice in her ear, reminding her what mattered. Some battles aren't won with bullets, Chief. You taught me that. They're won with truth, with courage, with the absolute refusal to accept that wrong is right just because powerful people say so. And truth, no matter how long it's buried, always finds its way to the light. Always.